Hello, and welcome to this overview of the population project for N411. And I'm Kathy Andresen, your instructor, and it's been a pleasure so far. I've been enjoying your discussions over the last several weeks, and I'm learning a lot from you, and I'm hoping you're enjoying the class so far. What the purpose of this next several weeks is going to be really integrated into preparing you for the population project. That is where you will actually explore a community of interest, and then you will gather some data about the community, do an assessment, identify a diagnosis, actually 3 diagnoses for the community of interest, and then select a priority, and then you will be presenting a health promotion activity as a result of your diagnosis. So this purpose of this is to just give you an overview of some tips on how you can put this together and make it meaningful and try to build up to it so at the very end you're not trying to scramble to get things done. So the first thing you'll notice that there's a copy of a textbook chapter that you are to review that goes fully over the community assessment process. So that's your best bet, is to first start with that. And in it, it'll talk about selecting your community of interest. What I'm going to encourage you to do is to this week select that community of interest by location and specifically by zip code. And so oftentimes I'll have students say, well, can I do a global experience, maybe something in another country? That's fine. I have no problem with that. The problem is sometimes getting to the data. And if you, the international data is not as easily retrievable as the United States data. But if you truly have an interest in that, let me know and I can try to connect you with some resources. But basically, the sky's the limit. Any place that you want to go, feel like maybe you've been there, want to learn a little bit more about it, it's entirely up to you. The big thing I want to caution you about is not to select something too big, like you don't want to say the entire state of Illinois or something, or even the entire city of Chicago. You want to go with a zip code within your community of interest. So digging a little bit, finding out where it might be of interest to you, that's going to be extremely important. The other piece of it is like, for example, in Davenport, where the university is located for St. Ambrose, there are several zip codes within Davenport, and you'll notice that there are disparities within those zip codes. So I really am wanting to guide you into selecting a place with a zip code, not just by the state or the city even, but by zip code. Can't stress that enough because you're going to have less frustration moving forward if you start with that. Secondly, when you're working through this over the next several weeks, you'll notice there's assignments that are data mining pieces that I've broken down for you by week. And those are really designed for you to start getting into the data and pulling things out. And you can actually start presenting those in your Dropbox that you submit to me each week over the next several weeks as PowerPoint slides. The value of that is you're already starting on your project, right? You're working towards it and you're going to be getting it done in a more efficient manner versus if you're turning it in some other way and have to copy and paste. So that's really the best way to go about it. And I'll give you feedback as you're going along to make sure you're on the right track. The final thing about assessing your community, you want to ensure that you are selecting relevant assessment parameters. So in the community assessment chapter, you're going to see a couple things. Well, first of all, you're going to see a windshield survey, and that's not something you're expected to do for this project. A lot of times you can actually go online and gather this information, never even visiting the place, just simply by looking at the data. And so it's helpful to know that there is a windshield assessment process, but your big focus is going to be on page 100, where it actually talks about the community assessment parameters. Now, there's no way you're going to be able to get all of these parameters in, but what I want you to do is to look at these and start thinking about your community and what's most important. Obviously, everybody's going to have to start somewhere with your geography, your population, those kinds of things. Then you're going to get into maybe some environmental things. But as you go down to under each category, you certainly don't have to do every single thing, but what is relevant to your specific community. So again, if you have any questions as you're going through that, this is where feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk you through it. Next, once you gather your data, you're going to be analyzing the data, and the assignment description gives a comprehensive rubric and how you'll be scored on this at the end. But I can't stress enough about the analysis piece, because this is where typically it trips folks up in that you know, they describe, hey, this is where the community is and this is what's going on. But what does that mean? What does that mean if you're seeing some environmental risks, or you're seeing a lack of green spaces, or if you're seeing a population that has a higher incidence or prevalence of a certain disease, which we're going to learn about in the upcoming weeks? What does that mean for your population and their outcomes? So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking the data, analyzing it, and then you're going to come up with 3 diagnoses based upon that analysis. And again, it's got to kind of connect the dots for us here. You've assessed a community just like you would a patient or an individual, and now you're to the point where what are those diagnoses based upon your findings? And then you're going to come up with a health promotion activity based upon the priority diagnoses. So do review the assignment expectations, but it's pretty specific on how you write your diagnoses based upon the chapter that's provided for you. And an example is looking at this graph in front of you, you know, in terms of who's more at risk for TB, and then, you know, who has limited access to health care. There might be a population in there. These are things that we've talked about over the last several weeks in terms of access to care. There's certain individuals, certain groups that are definitely marginalized and not going to have as much access. That's what I want you to be looking at, your health promotion based upon those types of things, so that you can then effectively determine how you've impacted that community of interest. Sometimes students will select a community based upon a problem. I encourage you to select a community. Every community has a problem. I'm going to tell you right now, every community has some kind of problem. The fun part of it is finding out what that is. So rather than kind of do it the other way around, I would encourage you to select a community that you're interested in, because you're going to be spending some time on this. Then let's find what is the problem. So the health promotion activity, it can be an existing program, and by all means, I do not expect you to reinvent the wheel. So for example, if you determine that there's a high prevalence of obesity in your community, then simply find some type of an intervention that has been proven to be effective in a similar community. What I'm after, though, is if say that rate of obesity is very high amongst adolescents, then I want to find an activity that's been proven for adolescents, maybe not for middle or older adults. So trying to find that, and there's lots of resources out there that you might find from the Healthy People 2020 and other sources like that throughout. But that's the fun part of it. You certainly can make up your own health promotion intervention, but it's simpler and trying to make it easier for you to if you use something that's already in existence. Based upon your priority nursing diagnosis. So you're going to have 3 diagnoses. What's the top one? Tell us why, and then build your health promotion activity on that. The other piece of it is that's what I'm talking about, where it has to be relevant to your community or population of interest. If you have a nursing diagnosis that is not related at all to your population of interest, then it's going to be difficult for you to measure the outcomes. So that's the next part of it. Who are your stakeholders? Really find that. And here's my little humor, and you kind of see through a little bit. Stakeholders is not what you see pictured there. Those are the people in the community, the primary people that are going to be impacted by any type of health promotion activities. And they could also be other organizations or interprofessional individuals that could help out with a health promotion. So, for example, police officers. They are stakeholders. If you have a community that has a high prevalence of violence, then you will want to ensure that you have stakeholders that are broad and not just in healthcare. Okay, and then the final thing here is how will you measure your outcomes? So that is part of the expectation, is that you come up with how you're going to measure those. So for example, the example I gave you about obesity. What if you do have a community that has a high rate of obesity? What would you expect to have happen in the short term and in the long term? This is stuff that you ladies do all the time in your work, I'm sure, in terms of measuring outcomes, but this is just putting it to a population. And then finally, tips for presenting your population project. So the first thing you want to do is use pictures and tell us all about your community story. There's going to be a peer review process at the end, so I want to ensure that we are looking at each other's work. But what do pictures tell you? This little guy here happens to be my grandson, and that's my son, and that's in Texas. So, you know, obviously this was a personal photo, but you could find things all over the internet that could tell the story about what's happening. This happens to be an area that is highly prone to flooding, and thankfully it was not flooded at that moment, but that is a risk for that particular community. Be prepared to record your presentation at the end, and there's not a paper with this, it's simply a presentation, and I want you to limit your presentation time to 15 or 20 minutes for this, and so if you go over, then that's problematic. So do rehearse and ensure that you can get through it in that amount of time, because if you're going longer than that, it's probably way too long. Okay, sorry, that's my cat this evening. Lastly, you want to make sure that you put notes at the bottom of the slides to fill in the gaps of information. So for example, maybe you are feeling that you want to share a lot of detail. I would keep it simple on the slide, and then you can put that in the notes so that you ensure that you're capturing any information that you felt is relevant, but you didn't want to take up a lot of space on the slide itself. Okay, the final thing is, if you have any questions, please, please, please email me, call me. I'm happy to meet any or all of you by phone or in person. I know that you're very, very busy nurses working all kinds of shifts, and I have a great deal of flexibility, which I'm more than happy to meet you and help you get through this process, because it can be a bit of a challenge. And this happens to be a community in Alaska that's a very rural community, and it's an island that's the only accessible is by boat or plane. And so I leave you with that as a possibility. Think about what you want to do here. Have fun with it. Please let me know if I can help you in any way, and I look forward to reviewing your work over the next several weeks.